It's our own living and breathing museum. The Salt River Bay. For over 2,000 years, this area saw its share of civilizations, from the prehistoric to the colonial era. It's where generations of Amerindians came to settle, and it's also the first place in this region that was touched by the New World. But today's reality is that the Salt River National Park is simply viewed as just a beautiful beach or traditional recreation site. Sure, everyone knows that this is a place that Christopher Columbus sailed into over 500 years ago. But quite often, that's as far as historical references go. Well, today, we turn back the chapters and revisit the history of this true cruising treasure, with, of course, help from our friends at the National Park Service.
I'm Dr. Meredith Hardy, an archaeologist with the National Park Service, Southeast Archaeological Center. People have been living at Salt River for over 2,000 years. I think one of the things that makes it so unique is that it's had so many different kinds of people living at the same place for so long. You have prehistoric people who migrated up here from Venezuela around the Orinoco River. They traded and interacted with people from Puerto Rico and Hispaniola and Antigua and all over the Caribbean, and even as far away as Guatemala and Colombia.
It provides one of the few protected, sheltered bays on this entire side of the island. It sort of has opening arms to the sea. The peoples arrived here in canoes from South America and were looking for a port. They could see there was fresh water, so they entered the bay, and it provided to them shelter from storms, natural resources to establish their villages, from very substantial forests that they could clear and produce their villages. And then once they were established here, it was a base of operations. It was easy for them to collect all the food resources they needed there.
Hey there's Andy.
Hey, welcome back, Janeisha.
Thank you. Hi, Janeisha.
Hi, Meredith.
Nice to meet you. So, what are we doing today?
We're going to explore Salt River. Come
Great.
on, let's go.
Now, the building we are touring is the Salt River Bay National Park Visitor Contact Station. For many years, it served as the home for the Cumpage family. But in 2003, the National Park Service purchased the property. Today, it's where rangers meet and greet visitors to the park and supply them with information pertaining to the park and its history. It's also the perfect place to get an overview of the bay and take magnificent pictures. As we continue our tour of the visitor station, we meet up with Superintendent Joel Tutine, who joins us on this tour of the park.
Salt River got its name when Columbus on his second voyage in 1493 came in search of fresh water. What he found was brackish water. Now, Salt River, when you look at St. Croix 500 years ago, it was a very lush, very green island. You had many rivers and streams running all over the island, and you had virgin forest. It was tremendous. I mean, the rainfall was nothing like what it is today, and therefore, all those tributaries led right to this Salt River Bay. So when Columbus got his information that he could find fresh water here, basically the river, which is now the sea, which has always been the sea, was salty. Those tributaries deposited into the Salt River Bay area, but by the time it got mixed with the bay itself, it was brackish.
Now, while most people know Salt River to be the area Christopher Columbus sailed into on his second voyage, they don't see the bay for what it really was, a main settling area for Amerindians and prehistoric people. In fact, simply walking through the park, you come upon evidence of these civilizations. Take for example this patch of dirt and shells. It may not seem like much, but it's actually our connection to those that lived here thousands of years before us.
Here's an example of some of the remains from the prehistoric village that was here at Salt River Bay. What you see is a bunch of conch and some stones, but unfortunately it's mixed up with a lot of modern materials. Cars drive down here when they park at the beach to come camping and stuff, and so a lot of the original remains are getting mixed up together. It's losing a lot of its original context.
What else other than conchs and shells?
There are remains of pottery.
Okay.
There's all kinds of, they would take actually the conch and break them apart and make tools out of them. So they would scrape things and they would make jewelry out of different parts of it and stuff. So this is really more like where they would store all of their things and then make the things that they used every day.
As mentioned earlier, this site is littered with artifacts from past civilizations and settlements. Two distinct remains are that of an Amerindian ball court and an earthen fort.
This is where we believe the ball court was standing.
Right here?
Okay, right in these trees somewhere. In 1923, an archeologist from the Danish National Museum named Gudmund Hott came here, and he excavated on St. Thomas and St. John and at many sites here in St. Croix, but he spent most of his time here, and he discovered a ball court. It was lined with stones that had carvings all over them. And it was lying right in here, and associated with this ball court were whole pots. Some had burials inside of them, like of children who had died, and many other kinds of ceremonial artifacts. We're not quite sure what they did with them, how they were used in their religious ceremonies, but we do know that they were all together here in this one spot.
Okay, so the ball court had ceremonial purposes also?
Yes, they played the ball game. Actually, when Columbus came to Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, they documented the Taino Indians there playing the ball game, and all of the rules and who could play and what kinds of things they did and why. They did it to determine, to settle arguments. Okay. They did it for religious reasons, and then they also did it just for fun. Men played against men, and women actually played against women. But you did not have co-ed teams.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, this is where we believe the ball court was. It's somewhere in this vegetation. We have some evidence still of it. There's some pottery actually here on the ground that looks like, see right here? And right here,
yeah,
that it could probably be 1,000 years old. Wow. We would have to do some tests on it, but to do those tests, there's you have to get permission from the National Park Service and from the Virgin Islands government for scientific research only. We don't allow people to just come along here and pick up souvenirs if they're walking through the woods and stuff, because if everybody came to pick up a souvenir, pretty soon there'd be nothing left.
And no way to tell the story. So.
Yep.
East of the park lies Fort Salah, which was built by the Dutch in the 1600s.
We are at the top of Fort Salah. We believe they began to build it in 1642. It was built by the Dutch. But what they used when they built it, it's all made of earth, they used part of the prehistoric midden from the village. So what you find in the ground up here is actually parts of the prehistoric pottery and shell and everything, but it's been reused. And they used this fort until the end of the French period, which is at 1696. The French abandoned the island. They were not able to make a lot of money from sugarcane plantations. And then when the island was sold to the Danes in 1733, 1732, the Danish military also used this fort, but it did not have the same prestige as it did during the 17th century.
Okay, so how large was this structure, this fort?
It's actually quite large. It had 3 bastions, 3 corners of the triangular fort. And then there was actually some archaeology that was done in the 1970s Unfortunately, we don't have all of the results from their excavations, but we do know that the soldiers were living here. They had families. I mean, it was a village. It was a small town sitting out here.
You may be wondering why more hasn't been done to excavate, study, and restore the fort and ball court. Well, unfortunately, the Park Service doesn't own the land that contains the structures. Yes, they're located in the Salt River Bay site, but they're not part of the National Park System. But what is part of the National Park is the Former Andersen collection, a collection of artifacts that were gathered from Salt River Bay and other locations around the island. Well, right now we're in the museum collection room, which is secured in Fort Christian Verne. So could you tell us a little bit about what we're watching here, Meredith?
Okay. These are artifacts from the Former Andersen collection. Former Andersen was a worker at the Bethlehem Sugar Works in the early 1900s, and he would go out to fields that were freshly plowed and collect artifacts. He was not an archaeologist, but he had enough of an interest in it that he knew that many of these sites would probably be destroyed in the near future. So he went ahead and collected many artifacts. And we're lucky in that he collected all kinds of things. He didn't just collect really pretty pots. He collected tools and shells and bones and all kinds of things. So what I've put out for you today is a variety of the different kinds of tools that people used 2,000 years ago up to the arrival of Columbus. They had all kinds of stone axes and celts. You can see here where it's been grooved. So you can actually tie it with ropes onto handles, and then you can use it to chop down trees. And things like this could be used for hoes to help dig, to plant your crops. They had all kinds of, they would grind stone into balls and use them to smash, to get at meat and the seashells and all that kind of stuff. And these are smooth. Then they use these to grind down all kinds of things, maybe to help grind down shells, parts of conch shells that they would use for tools as well, maybe different kinds of fruits and nuts and all kinds of things they would use. So these are examples of that.
Okay.
This stone here, you see that there are some lines that are carved in here. They would use these to help grind stones to make beads.
Okay.
And like this.
So
they're nice and smooth,
yeah,
and round like that. And then they would come on the ends and drill very slowly to make it an actual bead, so then they could string them and use them for jewelry. Now other kinds of stone tools, these are small, what we call celts and axes. Now remember I was talking a little while ago about there were trade relations. They had contacts with people from Venezuela, maybe Colombia and Guatemala. Some of these stones are made of a material called jadeite, and we've conducted chemical tests on some of these stones. And we found that actually the jadeite that they used in many cases came from one place in Guatemala that Mayans also used. So we don't know what the connections were, if they were trading along the coast and went all the way around the Caribbean, or if they went there directly. We don't know, but there's some kind of connection there. Let's see, so these are more shell tools. We call them scrapers. They could have used these to help make pots. They could have used them to help make wooden shafts for weapons and other kinds of tools and things. There's a long-held tradition that the Arawak people were very peaceful and the Carib people were very warlike.
Yeah.
In reality, there's no such thing.
Okay.
People fought and competed for land and all kinds of things, and so all kinds of people used all kinds of weapons and things. So many of these tools we have to try and interpret them for many other kinds of uses. Now here we have these kinds of shells, and you'll notice that many of them have holes in them.
Yeah.
And what they would do actually is they would string all of these up, and they would be like noisemakers. We call them tinklers. And we have many, many, many of these all over the place. And these are carved pieces of shell. We find many pieces that are carved like frogs.
Okay.
And they're drilled, so they would wear them as decorations. And some of these, they are carved to look like crabs. And then these are bone beads. They would take actual like bird bones and carve them up. They made, they would take manioc and make cassava bread. That's a very famous thing to make.
Yeah.
So these are the griddles that they would use after they made the bread, and then they would fry it on this. And it's very interesting. On the underside of this, there's a basket weave.
Oh.
So they would make these griddles and then put them out in the sun to dry. And the pattern of the baskets that they would set them on got put into the clay here. It's a neat little insight into how they lived, into what kinds of things that they did. And it also lets us know that they had many other kinds of tools and materials that did not preserve, like baskets.
Tells a story, definitely.
Now, the earliest people in St. Croix had two different kinds of pottery. This is the famous pottery. We call it white on red, and it's very well made. It's very well painted. As you can see, it's very distinctive, and you see this all over the Caribbean, from about 400 BC to about 400 AD.
Okay.
The second kind of pottery you find is this. And you'll see that there are very fine incisions, and it's very distinctive, different kinds of design elements over here. Now, we're not quite sure if these were two different kinds of people, two different societies, different religions, kind of like Catholic versus Protestant. It's interesting. It's interesting, and there's not many places on St. Croix where this material comes from. It's only from a few sites.
The designs on them, do they tell some sort of story or something?
I believe they do. People don't go to a lot of effort to decorate things if they don't have some kind of meaning to them.
I see that. And do you see anything that connects the two, possibly, in terms of design or
not
structure?
really on design, but the fact that many of them came from the same site.
Okay.
So, if they were two different cultures or two different societies, then they were interacting very closely.
Okay, so it may not have been at different times, it may have been the same time.
Yes, same time period.
Okay. Wow.
So here you have a bowl. It might date to maybe 200 BC, and you'll see the images of birds
Yes, I see that.
with the painting. Now you'll notice that the kind of red painting, it's not quite as good as that stuff. So this is a little later in time period.
Okay.
So maybe not 200 AD, maybe around 400 or 500 AD.
How significant is the shape and the form of the pottery? What does it do for a timeline for you?
Well, the different kinds of, we can trace back through time by looking at the different styles to see what were kind of the trends that people were making. Many of these forms we can trace back to South America at this time. They're about 500 BC, sometimes beyond that, on the Orinoco River. And then over time they change. So you can follow those changes.
That's so amazing. And I see here that this one is pretty large. Can you pick this up?
There you go. That's a pretty big pot.
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
What do you think this pot may have been used for?
It was probably ceremonial.
Okay.
This is a lot of effort and time. We don't even know where some of these paints came from. Like the white that they used for the clays in here. If they're going to a lot of efforts to obtain these materials, then you're not going to use these to cook your dinner every day.
That's true.
So, and we have plenty of other pots that are very plain, and I think those are the ones that they used every day.
Every day.
Yeah. Let's.
Ooh. Oh boy.
Oh yeah. We'll pull this one out. Here's another ceremonial-like pot, and you can see it looks like there's flippers.
Okay.
So it's either a turtle or some kind of another sea animal like this.
And I see here that you guys have, a lot of kind of use.
Yeah.
Do you guys have to amend them?
Well, this is what Former Andersen did. He would find these basically like broken in place, so he could reconstruct them. But in the 1930s, the way he did it was by using metal staples. It's not the best way to do it. We need to start working on these pieces and conserve them in the proper way. So we'll have to take out all of these metal pieces.
I see that.
But he did a good job.
Thank you.
For his time period, he did a good job. Thank you, Former.
Thank you. Now I see this one is pretty round. What is it?
We tend to call these pot stands.
Pot
And it
stands,
looks like they would put them in the fire and then put something over it. So the pots weren't sitting directly in.
The fire.
Right.
Okay. Kind of like the switchboard that we have on
Oh
our
yeah.
stoves.
Uh-huh.
What do you?
This is a little pot.
Oh, this?
Just like a little
Neat.
cup. Very simple.
Very
See, this is something that they might use every day. It's a little drinking cup. Maybe eating some of their one pot or the pepper pot.
The pepper pot.
Yeah. So I've shown you some of the decorated pottery. These are some of the plain pieces of pottery that, as we discussed, they would have used for everyday cooking and stuff.
Okay.
We also believe that many of these are later in time period. These are after AD 600, maybe 900 to 1000.
And again, the structure of it tells you that it's a little
Yes.
later than.
Let's see. I can do this without. Okay. So as you can see, it's not as proportional.
That's
It's
true.
not as well made. The decorative pieces are a little simpler, and you see very simple faces. There's like a mouth and eyes and stuff. This is from later time period,
Okay.
about 900 to 1080. And many of these large pieces actually came from the Salt River site, the whole pieces.
What do you think makes the structures, made different? Like, I mean, you say that these weren't made as great as the ones before. Was it the tools they had, or?
I think part of it is a loss of knowledge over
Okay.
time, over many generations. You're not teaching the same kinds of techniques. Another belief is that what they thought of as valuable goods changed.
That's true.
So their beliefs changed, their religions changed. They didn't give as much emphasis to making pottery as they did, let's say, carving stones for ball courts.
I see what you're saying. What's another interesting piece you have here?
Oh, let's see. These are. Oh, here's one.
Nice.
Here's one. Now these are all shaped like boats.
Yeah.
Kind of. They look like big canoes.
Canoes.
And this is from that later time period as well.
So their views look a little more simplistic versus the detailing in the previous. Okay.
We talked about the ball court and that they played a ball game for many reasons. Well, one of the artifacts that we find at ball courts, especially in Puerto Rico, they called them stone collars. And they were whole pieces of stone carved and ground, and they have little carvings on them. And we don't know what they used them for. If they were like trophies.
Okay.
It's hard to think that they would wear them while they were playing because they're very heavy. But we have remains of these stone collars here on St. Croix. So this shows that they were playing the game not just at Salt River, but at other places across the island too. So this is an example of part of one of the stone collars. The end is nicely ground here. It looks like it might have broken, and then they used it for some other reason. Sometimes these are also called elbow stones because it looks like an elbow.
Yes, it does.
And this is even later. This is like AD 1000 to 1200. This is Taino times.
Okay, saying it sometimes. I know the ball court was used for religious purposes and recreation. I heard something earlier about sometimes when you have to fight or anything like that. Do you think this could possibly have been as a weapon or anything
This,
like that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
There's no real, from Puerto Rico, there's no real evidence these are weapons. They were either trophies or they had something to do with the actual game.
Okay. I want to thank you, Zandy and Meredith, so much for the interesting experience I've had today. I've learned so much, and I want to say it was great taking me a trip back into the past and learning a little bit about our history here on St. Croix. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
And I'll see you guys again, hopefully sometime soon.
Yes, of
All
course.
right.
There's more adventures ahead.
Thank you.
We still know so little about the ancient peoples who first came here to St. Croix. We don't even have a good radiocarbon date that says when they first arrived here. All we have is pottery, and we can compare the pottery to archaeological sites on other islands, but we don't have an early date yet. So we don't know how they really lived and what kinds of plants they grew and how they lived their lives.
so much history in front of us, and many of you probably didn't even know that it was there. But you know what? That's what makes St. Croix such a special island. I want to thank you for joining us today, and always remember to cherish your home, this beautiful island, but most of all, cherish each other. I'll see you next time.